Some men get underestimated by accident. A stranger reads them wrong. A first impression lands sideways. It happens once, gets corrected. Everyone moves on, and the whole thing becomes a mildly embarrassing story somebody tells at a retirement dinner 20 years later. I got underestimated on purpose. Deliberately, systematically, over a period of years, by a woman who had lived beside me long enough to know exactly which parts of me looked small, and who had made a quiet, careful decision to use those parts as a weapon. And I want to be honest about something before I go any further, because I think honesty is the only reason a story like this is worth telling. I let her, not because I was weak, not because I didn't see what was happening. I let her because I had learned something over 40 years of professional life that most people never learn or learn too late to use. A man who is underestimated is a man who is left alone to work. And I have always done my best work when no one was watching. My name is Gerald Marsh. I am 66 years old. I live in Columbus, Ohio, and I have lived here for most of my adult life, with the exception of 4 years in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in Charlotte, North Carolina, when I was 23 years old, and I convinced myself that a change of geography would clarify something about my future. It did not clarify anything. I came home in the spring of 1983 with $400 in a checking account and a very clear understanding that I was a Midwest man, had always been a Midwest man, and that the sooner I stopped arguing with that fact, the better off I would be. I want to tell you something about how I present myself to the world, because it matters to this story in ways that will become clear. I am a plain man. I have always been a plain man, and I want you to understand that I say that without apology and without false modesty. Plain is a choice I made a long time ago and have never revisited. My clothes come from places with wide parking lots and no questions returned policies. My hands are large and the knuckles on my right hand have been permanently swollen since 1987 when I jammed 3 fingers in a loading dock door at a warehouse. I was working during a contract transition. I drive a 2004 Chevrolet Silverado with 211,000 miles on the odometer, a crack in the dashboard on the passenger side that I have repaired with electrical tape twice, and a cup holder that stopped functioning correctly sometime around 2019. I wedge a paper coffee cup between the seat and the center console. It works fine. I eat breakfast most Tuesday mornings at a diner on Morse Road called Maze. I have been going there since 2004. I order the same thing every time. 2 eggs over easy wheat toast, a side of home fries that I always intend to finish and never do. The woman who takes my order is named Brenda. She has worked at Maze for at least 11 years. She brings the coffee before I sit down. We do not talk much. That is, in my experience, the foundation of a very good working relationship. I tell you all of this because on a Tuesday morning in March of 2023, a man in a suit that cost more than my first car looked across the courtroom at all of it. The Silverado, the Walmart shirt, the plain hands, the whole quiet presentation of my life, and decided he had the full measure of me. He did not. Welcome to Dad's Raw Revenge. Get comfortable, because this one is going to take you somewhere. Drop a comment, and let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button, and make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, you're going to love it here. I need to tell you what I did for a living, because without that, the rest of this doesn't hold together the way it should. I spent 31 years working as a government contractor in facilities compliance. I know that phrase lands like a bag of wet sand, and I have always found it useful. Facilities compliance, in a language that actual human beings use, means that I spent 3 decades reading infrastructure contracts, the large, dense, deliberately complicated documents that govern how public buildings get built, maintained, transferred, and legally accounted for. I reviewed liability structures. I identified ownership exposure. I advised project managers and municipal attorneys on how to arrange the legal architecture of an asset so that it did what they needed it to do without creating the kind of problems that show up 4 years later in a deposition. I was not celebrated at this work. I was not written up in trade publications or invited to speak at conferences. I showed up. I read documents that other people found unreadable. I found the things they had missed. I wrote clean, specific memos. I went home for 31 years. What that work gave me, beyond a pension I have never needed to touch, was a very particular education in how ownership actually functions in this country, not how people think it functions, not the version they teach in a one-semester business course, the real version. The version where the name on a document and the person who benefits from that document are frequently two entirely different things, arranged that way on purpose, by someone who understood that visibility and value are not the same thing. In 2009, at the age of 51, I retired from contracting. I did not stop working. I began doing what I had spent 30 years watching other people do imperfectly, and I began doing it with a specific advantage of knowing exactly where the imperfect parts were. I began acquiring. I want to be precise about what that means, because I am not going to tell you a story about lightning strike wealth or a secret fortune stumbled into by accident. What I did was methodical, slow, and deeply ordinary to anyone who understood the mechanics of it. I identified undervalued properties in secondary markets, mid-sized cities, small commercial corridors, rural parcels with attached income, and I acquired them through a series of limited liability companies that I begun structuring in 2006, 3 years before I retired, during the last stretch of my contracting career, when I had enough visibility into what was coming to begin preparing for it. The first entity I established was called Marsh Holdings, LLC. It was registered in Ohio in October of 2006. It held nothing for 2 years. It was a framework, a container I built before I had anything to put in it, because I had spent enough time in my professional life watching people scramble to build a container after they already needed it, and I had decided I was not going to do that. By 2014, through Marsh Holdings and 4 subsidiary LLCs, I owned 14 properties across Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee. The portfolio included a commercial strip in Bowling Green, Kentucky that I had acquired in 2011 for $340,000, and that was generating $94,000 per year in triple net lease income from 3 tenants. It included a warehouse property outside Cincinnati that I had picked up in a distress sale in 2012 for $187,000. It included a half-acre parcel outside Knoxville, Tennessee that looked from the road like a flat piece of nothing, and that had a cell tower lease attached to it paying $27,400 per year, indexed to inflation through 2031. It included 6 other properties I will not detail here, because this story is already long and the specifics, while satisfying to me personally, are not what matters. What matters is this. By the time Diane filed for divorce in January 2023, the independently audited value of those holdings was $4,870,000. The annual income from leases and commercial tenants was $387,400. And not one of those properties, not one of those entities, had my given name listed as the primary owner on any public-facing document. That was not an accident. That was 30 years of professional habit applied to my personal life with the same discipline I had applied to every contract I had ever reviewed. Diane knew I owned properties. She knew the way a person knows something they have chosen not to examine, at a surface level, without curiosity, without the specific hunger for detail that would have told her what she was actually dealing with. She knew I had income beyond the pension. She knew the Silverado was a choice. She had seen, over 22 years, the occasional manila envelope from an attorney's office, the quarterly statements from entities whose names meant nothing to her, the yellow legal pads I kept in the bottom drawer of my desk. She had never asked about any of it. I used to think that was incuriosity. I have since revised that assessment. I think she looked at me, the diner, the truck, the Walmart shirts, the quiet, undemanding life I appear to lead, and she made a calculation, a slow, patient, deliberate calculation that she had been running for longer than I knew, and the conclusion of that calculation was that whatever I had, it was modest, and modest things are easy to take from a man who looks like he won't fight back. She was half right. I wasn't going to fight. That part she had correct. The rest of it she had exactly wrong. I found out she had engaged an attorney in October of 2022, not because she told me, because I found a billing statement in the kitchen trash on a Saturday morning at 7:14 a.m. I had taken the bag out to replace it, which is something I do every Saturday morning as a matter of routine, and the statement was folded in thirds near the bottom of the bag, underneath a cereal box and 2 used paper towels. It was from a firm called Hartwell & Associates. The charge was $3,200. The line item read, initial consultation, and case strategy review, dissolution matter. I stood at that trash can for a moment. The kitchen was quiet. The coffee maker had finished its cycle, and the kitchen smelled the way it does on Saturday mornings when the heat hasn't kicked on yet, and the light is still low and orange through the east window. I set my coffee cup on the counter. Something in me went very still. Not the hot still of anger, the cold still, the kind that settles into a man when he understands that the situation he is looking at has been in motion for some time, and that the only productive response is to begin moving. I picked up my cup. I finished my coffee. I rinsed the cup, set it upside down in the drying rack the way I always do. I walked out to the garage. I got into the Silverado, and I sat with the engine off for 11 minutes. I did not call anyone. I did not compose any messages. I sat, and I thought about the billing statement, and about what $3,200 for an initial consultation and case strategy review told me about the firm Diane had chosen, and about what it told me about how long she had been building toward this before I found that piece of paper on a Saturday morning in October. Then I backed out of the driveway and drove to Mays on Morse Road. Brenda brought the coffee before I sat down. I ordered my usual. I ate my breakfast. I left a $4 tip. I drove home. On the way home, I called Patricia Osei. Patricia Osei is a family law attorney. She operates out of a modest office on North High Street in Columbus, 2 floors above a dry cleaner with 2 paralegals, a filing system she describes as intuitive and that her clients universally describe as alarming, and a professional reputation that is, among the people who know what to look for, essentially unimpeachable. She has been practicing family law in Ohio for 23 years. Before that, she clerked for a federal judge in the Southern District of Ohio for 2 years. And before that, she graduated second in her class from the Ohio State Moritz College of Law. She does not mention any of this. I know it because I looked, which is what I do before I call anyone about anything that matters. I had known Patricia for 6 years before that Saturday morning. We had met at a continuing education seminar for compliant professionals in Cleveland in the fall of 2016. She had been there to present on asset disclosure methodology in high net worth dissolution proceedings. I had been there because I found the topic directly applicable to decisions I was in the process of making about my own holdings. We had talked for approximately 40 minutes over coffee that tasted like it had been made before either of us arrived at the building. She had been precise, specific, and completely uninterested in impressing me. I had found all 3 of those qualities remarkable. I had kept her card in the back of my wallet since that afternoon in Cleveland. I had hoped, in a general way, that I would never need it professionally. She answered on the second ring. I told her I had found a billing statement. I told her the firm name. I told her the amount and the line item description. I told her that I believed, based on that amount and on the specific language of the line item, that the engagement had begun no less than 6 weeks prior to the statement date, and possibly longer. I did not editorialize. I gave her the fact the way I had given facts to municipal attorneys for 30 years, clean, sequenced, without decoration. She asked me 6 questions. They were good questions, specific and direct, and I answered all 6 of them without hesitation. She told me to come in on Wednesday at 2 p.m. I want to tell you something about the weeks between that phone call and the Wednesday appointment, because I think it matters to understanding who I am and how I operated during this period. I did not tell anyone what was happening. Not my brother Dale, who lives 20 minutes from me in Westerville and who I talked on the phone most Sunday evenings. Not my friend Clarence Webb, who I have known since 1979 and who would have driven to my house inside of an hour if I had called him. Not my daughter Renee, who lives in Denver and who calls me every Thursday evening at 7 o'clock regardless of what is happening in either of our lives. I told no one. I went about my life with the same Tuesday rhythm, the same Saturday trash routine, the same yellow legal pads in the desk drawer. I mowed the lawn on the Saturday afternoon after I found the billing statement, which needed mowing, and I made a pot of chili on Sunday, which I do most Sundays from October through March. I watched the Browns lose, which they do with consistency I have come to find almost comforting. In the evenings, after Diane had gone upstairs, I sat at the kitchen table with the yellow legal pad, and I built 3 columns. The first column was what I believed Diane's attorneys knew. The second was what I believed they did not know. The third was what I needed to confirm before Wednesday. The first column was short. The second was long. The third was manageable. If you have been listening for a while, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing, and it means everything to us. Hit the like button while you're at it, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Patricia's office on North High Street was exactly what I had expected from a woman who described her filing system as intuitive. There were accordion folders on every horizontal surface, 2 cork boards on a wall behind her desk covered in handwritten index cards connected by colored pushpins, and a smell of black tea and old paper that I found immediately comfortable. Her desk faced the door. The window behind her looked out onto a parking garage. She had a cup of tea at her elbow when I came in. She did not offer me one. I did not expect her to. She read through the yellow legal pad page by page, holding it with both hands, her eyes moving at the specific pace of someone who is actually reading rather than scanning. She did not write anything down while she read. When she finished, she sat on the desk between us, folded her hands on top of it, and looked at me for what I counted carefully as 4 full seconds. Then she said, "Walk me through the LLC structure. All of it. Start with the first entity and go forward chronologically." We were in that office for 2 hours and 50 minutes. I walked her through every entity, every property, every lease agreement, every operating agreement, every capitalization event. I gave her the names of the 3 attorneys who had drafted the original entity documents. I gave her the name of the CPA who had managed the tax structure since 2010, a man named Howard Price who operates out of a small office in Dublin, Ohio, and who has the personality of a filing cabinet and professional instincts of someone considerably more interesting. I gave her the date of every acquisition. I gave her the specific odd-numbered dollar amounts. $340,000 for Bowling Green, $187,500 for the Cincinnati warehouse, $94,200 for a duplex in Knoxville I had picked up in 2015. Patricia did not react to any of the numbers. She asked clarifying questions with the consistency of a metronome. At one point, she stood up, went on the cork boards, removed 3 index cards, and replaced them with new ones. She did not explain why. I did not ask. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and looked at her hands for a moment. She said, "How long do you believe your wife's team has been investigating the asset picture?" I said I believed no more than 3 months based on the billing statement, but that I could not rule out a longer preliminary period of informal inquiry. She said, "They haven't found it." I said I did not believe they had. She said, "Good. That gives us a specific window and a specific objective." She told me what she needed from me before the filing arrived. She told me what Howard Price would need to prepare. She told me the name of a forensic accountant she wanted to bring in for independent verification, a woman named Dr. Claudette Burrows, who worked out of Cincinnati and whom Patricia described simply as exact. I left the office at 4:53 p.m. I sat in the Silverado in the parking garage for a few minutes with the engine off. The city noise coming through the window that doesn't go all the way down. I thought about 22 years. I thought about the billing statement folded in thirds at the bottom of a kitchen trash bag. I thought about the specific quality of the cold that had been sitting in me since that Saturday morning. Not grief, not fury, something slower and more permanent than either of those. A decision that had formed the way ice forms on a still lake, quietly, completely, without announcement. I started the truck. I drove home. I made dinner. I watched the news. I went to bed. Diane filed on January 11th, 2023, at 10:22 in the morning. I know the exact time because Patricia called me 14 minutes after the filing was stamped and read it to me over the phone in the precise, unsentimental way she delivers all information. I was in the garage at the time, replacing the serpentine belt on the Silverado, which had been squealing since November and which I had been putting off addressing. I thanked her. I told her I would call Howard Price and Dr. Burrows that afternoon. I finished the belt replacement. I washed my hands at the utility sink. I made a sandwich. Her attorney was Christopher Vaugh, a partner at Hartwell and Associates who had, by the time I encountered him, spent approximately 18 years building a professional identity around performance of certainty. He was not, from what I observed, a stupid man. He was thorough in the ways that are taught and incurious in the ways that are assumed. He had looked at the surface of my life. The truck, the diner, the plain clothes, the modest house on Fenwick Drive, and he had done the thing that people with a particular kind of confidence always do. He had stopped looking. I will grant him this. He had no particular reason to look further. Everything he could see told him a coherent story. The story was simply not the one he believed it was. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for February 9th, 2023, at 9 a.m. in the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas, Division of Domestic Relations. I arrived at 8:31 a.m. I parked the Silverado in a public garage 2 blocks from the courthouse and walked. It was a cold morning, 22 degrees, and I had not worn a heavy coat because the coat I own that is appropriate for a courthouse is a dark wool overcoat that Renee had given me for Christmas in 2019 and that, when I put on, gives a certain impression. I had thought about that impression for approximately 4 seconds, and then hung the coat back on the hook and put on my regular jacket. I was wearing a blue Walmart shirt. I had owned it since 2018. It fits correctly and is easy to iron. I had ironed it that morning at 6:45 a.m. Patricia was already in the building when I arrived. She was standing in the hallway outside the courtroom with a paralegal named Marcus, who was 24 years old and who carried documents with the specific, careful attention of someone who has been told twice not to crease anything. Patricia had a single manila folder. It was closed. She was drinking from a paper cup of coffee. When she saw me, she said good morning and asked if I had eaten. I told her I had stopped at May's. She nodded as if that was the correct answer. Christopher Vaughn arrived at 8:49 a.m. with 2 associates and a paralegal. His suit was charcoal gray, and his shoes were the kind that make a specific sound on courthouse floors, a sound that I think is calculated to arrive before its owner does. He looked at Patricia. He looked at me. He smiled in the way that people smile when they are not actually communicating warmth but are communicating confidence, which is a different thing entirely. We went in at 9:02. The judge was the Honorable Sandra Pritchett. She had been on the domestic relations bench in Franklin County for 11 years. She had gray hair cut close to her head, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the specific manner of someone who has heard every version of every argument that is likely to be made in her courtroom and has organized her reactions accordingly. She was not unkind. She was also not performing. Christopher Vaughn presented his opening position for the preliminary hearing. He was fluid and structured, and the argument was clean. He cited the joint accounts, a combined balance of $43,000 at the time of filing. He cited the house on Fenwick Drive, which he valued at $391,000 based on a comparative market analysis his firm had commissioned. He cited Diane's vehicle, a 2021 Audi A4 titled in her name. He cited my pension, which he had the correct figure for. Then he paused. It was the kind of pause a man takes when he wants you to understand that what follows is the point. Your Honor, he said, my client and her team had conducted a thorough review of the marital estate. What that review has revealed is an estate of modest and clearly documented composition. Mr. Marsh has presented himself to this proceeding without retained legal counsel of record until very recently. He glanced at Patricia in a way that I will simply describe as dismissive, which we believe reflects the limited complexity of his financial situation. He looked at me then, directly for a moment. The smile was slight and controlled. Your Honor, my client's husband cannot afford basic legal representation. He has no assets worth dividing beyond what has already been identified and disclosed. He said it pleasantly, with the ease of someone reading from a document they have no reason to doubt. Judge Pritchett was writing something. She did not look up. I did not move. I had my hands flat on the table in front of me. I looked at the middle distance, which is something I have been doing in rooms where other people are performing for approximately 40 years. You look at nothing specific. You breathe at your normal rate. You give nothing to the room. Patricia waited until Vaughn had completed his full presentation. Every section, every exhibit referenced the summary and proposed framework for asset division. She waited until he had arranged his papers and recapped his pen, and sat back in his chair with the particular settled quality of a man who believes he has just described a foregone conclusion. Then she opened the manila folder. She removed one page, one single document. She did not hold it up. She did not announce it dramatically. She slid across the table to the clerk, who passed it to the judge with the procedural efficiency of someone who does this 40 times a week. Your Honor, Patricia said, I'd like to enter into preliminary record the ownership disclosure summary for the Marsh Family Holdings Group, prepared by Dr. Claudette Burrows, CPA, CVA, of Burrows Financial Forensics in Cincinnati, dated January 3rd, 2023. Independent verification of all underlying instruments is available in full upon the court's request. Judge Pritchett picked up the page. She put her reading glasses on. She read it. She turned it over. There was nothing on the back. She turned it back to the front and read it again from the top. The room had a specific quality of silence, not the ordinary silence of a proceeding between arguments, the other kind, the kind that happens when the information in a room has changed. Christopher Vaughn leaned forward slightly. He said something low to the paralegal beside him. She looked at her documents, then back at him, and made a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. He did not have the document. He did not know what was on it. I could see, without looking directly at him, the particular quality of stillness that comes over a confident man when he realizes that the rain has shifted under him. Judge Pritchett set the document down on the bench in front of her. She looked at Patricia. She looked at me. Then she looked at Christopher Vaughn with the top of her reading glasses with the expression of a woman who has been in this courtroom for 11 years and does not have a great deal of patience for having her time treated as a formality. She said, Counsel, I'm going to need you to explain to me how your client's team arrived at the characterization of this marital estate as modest. Vaughn asked for 15 minutes. Judge Pritchett looked at the clock on the wall and told him he had 10. He went into the hallway with both associates and the paralegal. The door closed behind them. Patricia poured herself a glass of water from the pitcher on the table. She offered me one. I said no thank you. She took a small sip. She set the glass down. She looked at the window at the far end of the courtroom, which showed a gray February sky and the top of a building across the street. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The document Patricia had entered into preliminary record contained the ownership disclosure summary for the Marsh Family Holdings Group, all 4 subsidiary entities, all 14 properties, the full lease income schedule, and the independently verified total asset value of $4,870,000 as of the audit date. Dr. Claudette Burrows had prepared it with the specific, unhurried thoroughness of someone who is exact, which is exactly how Patricia had described her. Every number was sourced. Every entity was cross-referenced to its state registration. Every property was attached to its assessed value, its income history, and its ownership chain. It was, as documents go, very quiet. It did not announce itself. It simply described what existed, in plain language, in 12-point font, on one page. What it described was not a modest estate. Christopher Vaughn came back in after 9 minutes and 40 seconds. I counted because I count things. He was a different version of himself than the one who had walked out, not shaken. Exactly, he was too professional for shaken, but recalibrated in a way that was visible if you were looking for it. He sat down. He had a yellow legal pad of his own now, which he had not had before. He asked Judge Pritchett for permission to request a 30-day continuance to allow his team to review the newly entered documentation. Judge Pritchett looked at him for a moment without expression. She said, Counsel, you have had since January 11th to prepare for this preliminary hearing. I am not going to give you 30 days to do what your team should have done in that time. You have 2 weeks. I would encourage you to use them carefully. She adjourned the hearing at 11:47 a.m. I walked out of that courthouse into a gray February morning that had gotten colder since I arrived. The wind off the Scioto was doing what February wind in Columbus does, which is arrive from a direction you did not expect and make you wish you had worn the heavier coat. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment. A city bus went past. A woman in a red coat walked a dog that was intensely interested in a crack in the pavement. Somewhere half a block away, someone was using a hand truck to move boxes into a building. The metal wheels loud on the sidewalk. Ordinary Tuesday morning sounds. The city had no particular opinion about what had just happened in that courtroom. I walked to the parking garage. I got into the Silverado. I wedged my coffee cup between the seat and the broken cup holder. I sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel and looked at the concrete wall in front of me. Then I drove to Mays on Morse Road. It was 12:08 p.m. I ordered a bowl of chili and a coffee. Brenda brought the coffee without being asked, which she always does, and I sat at my usual table by the window and watched Morse Road do what it does on a cold Tuesday afternoon, which is mostly trucks and the occasional person who looks like they would rather be somewhere warmer. What followed over the next 7 months was, for Christopher Vaugh and Diane and the expanded team of attorneys at Hartwell and Associates eventually brought in an extended and increasingly uncomfortable education in asset structure and marital property law. For me, it was paperwork, a great deal of paperwork, and 4 depositions and 2 mediation sessions. And one morning when Howard Price and Dr. Burroughs sat in a conference room in Patricia's building for 6 hours with Vaugh's forensic team and answered questions about entity formation with the patient, methodical thoroughness of people who have nothing to hide and nothing to apologize for. There were, across those 7 months, 4 separate discovery requests. There was a second independent audit, this one commissioned by Diane's team, which confirmed Dr. Burroughs' numbers within a margin of $12,000, a margin Dr. Burroughs, noted in writing, without particular drama, represented a rounding difference in the Knoxville cell tower lease calculation. There was a deposition in which I sat for 6 hours and 40 minutes and answered 214 questions about the structure of the Marsh Family Holdings Group. I was asked, in 11 different formulations across those 6 hours, whether I had deliberately concealed assets from my spouse during the marriage. My answer each time was the same. I had structured my holdings the way my professional experience told me they should be structured. I had not hidden anything. I had organized it. The entities were registered, compliant, tax reported, and documented. Every instrument was discoverable by anyone willing to look with appropriate specificity. The distinction between hiding and organizing is not, as Patricia noted in her written response to that line of questioning, a semantic one. It is a structural one. And structure, as I had spent 31 years learning, is everything. The settlement was finalized on September 7th, 2023, at 2:30 in the afternoon. Diane received the house on Fenwick Drive, appraised at $387,000 at the time of settlement. She received her vehicle. She received $214,000 from the agreed liquidation of 2 smaller properties, a fourplex in a Columbus suburb that had been underperforming since 2020, and a half-acre Knoxville parcel. The cell tower lease on which had 18 months remaining before its first renewal option. She received a spousal support structure that Patricia had negotiated from Vaugh's original proposed figure by a margin I will describe only as significant. What she did not receive was 7 months of expanded legal effort and 2 independent audits, and 214 deposition questions could not convert into a transferable asset was the Marsh Family Holdings Group, LLC, or any of its 4 subsidiary entities. The operating agreements of those entities, drafted in 2006 and amended twice since, predated the marriage. The capitalization events that had built the portfolio had occurred during the marriage, which created legitimate marital interest in the income those events had generated. Patricia negotiated a specific, documented settlement figure for that interest. It was fair. It was accurate. It was considerably less than Christopher Vaugh had projected in his original case strategy. Judge Pritchett reviewed the settlement agreement on October 3rd, 2023, at 9:47 in the morning. Her clerk called Patricia's office to confirm execution. Patricia called me from her car on the way back to her office. She said, "It's done, Gerald." I said, "Thank you, Patricia." She said she would have the executed copies to me by end of week. She told me to call if I had questions. She hung up. Patricia Osei is not a woman who lingers on phone calls, which is one of many things I respect about her. I was sitting at the kitchen table when she called. My kitchen table. The table I had eaten at for 22 years, that I would continue to eat at, in the house I now had to myself, in the quiet that a house takes on when the life it contained reorganizes itself into something different. I had a cup of coffee in front of me that had gone cold while I was reading a lease amendment for a property in Bowling Green. The October light was coming through the east window at the low flat angle it comes in the fall, the specific angle that makes everything look more defined than usual, more itself. I picked up the coffee cup. I took a sip. Cold coffee on an October morning, in a quiet, kitchen, with executed settlement papers on the way and a portfolio that was still intact and still generating $387,400 a year from tenants who paid on time and asked very little of me. I took a sip, and I let the coldness sit for a moment, and then I set the cup down and picked up my pen and went back to the lease amendment, because it needed reviewing and it was not going to review itself. There is something I want to say before I close this story, and I want to say it carefully, because I think it is the only part that matters beyond the facts. A man who builds things quietly is not a man who has built nothing. This is a thing I have believed for a long time, and everything that has happened to me has only made me believe it more. There's a kind of work that looks, from the outside, exactly like stillness, exactly like simplicity, exactly like a man who is content with the truck and the diner and the Walmart shirts and the ordinary, unhurried rhythm of a life that asks nothing of anyone. And the people who see that, who look at it and calculate from it and build a legal strategy on top of it, those people are not wrong about what they see. They're only wrong about what it means. Patience is not passivity. Silence is not surrender. And a man who lets you underestimate him has given you something that looks like an advantage. It is not an advantage. One attorney, one document, one morning in October with cold coffee and executed papers and a low fall light through the east window. 31 years of work, quietly done, correctly structured, and exactly where I left it. That has always been enough for me. If you enjoyed this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of Dad's Raw Revenge. I will see you on the next one.